Belcha. 1,000 welcomes to Crann Short Stories and Poetry for May 31st. I'm Terrance Ó Domhnaill, your village scéalaí, with more stories and poems from online writers. I have 4 short stories this week. No poems, sorry. The first is Chapter 18 of the ongoing story From Beyond the Waterwall, and 3 other stories, one of which is from a Substack writer. All but one are science fiction, and the first 2 are rated PG-13. So parents, be mindful if you let your children listen to this podcast. So gather around once more, let me read them to you under the shade of the crann, the tree of life. So my first story, as I always do here these last few weeks, is the continuing chapters of Beyond the Waterwall. This one, Chapter 18, Battle in the Fire by Don Woodby, again published in the Fiction Writer's Den. Previously, Mars, Wren, Trench, Spike, and Abby assassinated Bogus. Now they must escape the burning mansion. The dead girls lay on the floor as the bullets whizzed on Mars' ears. Wren stood by his side, both with their backs against the wall, trying to bring themselves out of the line of vision from the other side of the door. Trench and Spike sat on the ground, leaning on the couch, covering their heads with their arms, trying to find an opening to shoot back. The fire from the room slowly spread, moving steadily toward them. Wren glanced back and shook Mars violently. He jumped up and began shooting from his arm. The heat scalded their rears. Mars looked down at his arm for a moment and stopped. He set the cursor to 2 and pressed the button. Pieces of concrete and body parts flew around the air with a massive burst. Fire and a pile of wreckage blocked the exit. "We got a detour through the other side," Mars shouted, rushing to the other door. Spike shook his head. "This is going to be swarming with soldiers." "We don't have a choice," Trench said. The door led to another, larger living room. 2 soldiers turned up inside and shot at them without a warning. The darkness shielded them. No one was hit. Mars had only 1 more bomb left. He set his weapon to 1 again. Alongside Spike and Trench, he shot back. Both soldiers fell, leaving a red splatter on the wall. They jumped over the dead bodies to cross the door that led to the party room. They were back on their original path. Wren burned the whole place behind them to avoid any ambush from the rear. They struggled to breathe through the smoke. The alarm impairing their hearing, it was dark. After dashing through the game room, they found themselves in the broad garden again. The sweet aroma of the flowers slowly mixed with the fumes coming from the house. The moonlight broke the darkness. They could see again, but they could also be seen. "Take cover!" Spike shouted as he collapsed. Trench ran to one side, Mars and Wren went to the other, hiding behind a tree. Spike lay on the ground, struggling to crawl back toward his rifle. His right leg left a trail of blood on the grass. He covered his head with his arms as dust lifted from the soil with a swarm of bullets around him. "Stay down," Mars yelled, peeking around the tree to check where the bullets were coming from. "Don't move," he whispered to Wren. Mars looked at Trench, who signaled that there were 3 enemies and pointed at their position. He nodded to Mars and jumped out of his refuge, running and shooting. When the soldiers showed themselves, Mars quickly aimed at them. 2 fell dead. The other one tried to drag himself away from the scene, but was hit in the back. Trench, seemingly unscathed, rushed back to Spike and dragged him toward the tree next to Wren. The walls were still distant, and they needed to cross the whole courtyard. "How are you?" Trench asked, shaking Spike softly. I think I'm okay," he gasped for air. It was just my leg." "Abby should be here with the ladder," Mars said. "She would have no way to come inside in the middle of the shootout," Trench said. "We got to figure out a way to get out of here." The whiz from the bullets started again. 3 more soldiers advanced from the other side of the yard. The flames from the house slowly spread through the grass. "I know how to get us out of here," Mars said as he moved the switch on his weapon. "I'm going to need you to cover for me. I'm too far away." Trench frowned. "What are you going to do?" Mars looked at the wall and at the back and sighed. "Trust me, I need you to shoot at them and run to the right as fast as you can." The fisherman nodded, looked at his weapon, and made the sign of the cross. Mars kneeled up and waited. "If something happens to me, you run," he whispered to Wren. He then pointed to the wall. "You run through that wall, you find Abby, and drive away without looking back." Mars inhaled deeply, looking at Trench, and shouted, "Now!" Terrance ran quickly to the right and began to shoot. The bullets from his shotgun couldn't properly reach his target, but he drew their attention. Mars sneaked out of the tree and prowled ahead. He needed to be closer. He couldn't miss. There was only one bomb left. Just 10 more steps, he thought to himself. The words had barely formed in his mind, and one of the soldiers spotted him. The trooper shouted something, and suddenly they all pointed their guns at Mars. He jumped to the left as the bullets surrounded him. He aimed at the wall the best way he could and pressed the trigger. Smoke, bricks, and pieces of metal flew away in the air. The shockwave hit the enemies from behind, throwing them to the ground. "Get Spike!" Mars shouted at Terrance. The fishermen rushed back to where Wren was, and both held Spike, each one by one arm, and dragged him through the grass. Mars tried to run, but his legs didn't answer. Blood ran down his face and blurred his vision. He limped his way to the giant hole that was open in the wall. "Where's Abby?" Mars asked as the others approached the fence. Terrance slapped Spike on the face, making him open his eyes. "Don't let go." Distant sirens got closer and closer, mixing with the alarm coming from the burning mansion. Mars crouched and grabbed Spike's arm. "Help me," he said, looking at Terrance. "We need to leave." "Wait," Wren said. "Maybe she will The fisherman's car showed up, turning the street. The wheels squealed as Abby hit the brakes in front of them. "Get on fast," she shouted. Wren got inside. Mars and Terrance threw Spike on the bench and jumped in. "I was driving around the walls looking for you guys. When I heard the explosion, I came as fast as I could." 2 large black vehicles turned on corner as she drove off quickly. "Don't go to the road yet," Mars yelled. "They can't follow us back home." Abby drove around the block, but the black SUVs were faster. "We can't outrace them," Terrance said. Mars removed the rifle strapped around Spike's neck. He pulled down the window slightly, making a tiny opening and positioning the rifle there. "Hold it," he said to Terrance. He then opened the other window and pointed his arm gun at the other side. "Go to the freeway," Mars shouted. Abby turned the car under an overpass and continued to a wide highway. The 2 vehicles were faster and followed them closely. Each one of them moved to one side of their car. Now Mars began shooting at them, aiming for the wheels. The fishermen followed, but the other cars rammed them from each side, squeezing them in the middle. Abby struggled to keep control and stabilize the wheels. The SUVs moved away and hit them again. When they began to part, Mars and Terrance managed to hit the wheels. They spun out of the road and overturned. "Turn around, let's go back," Terrance said, looking back, checking if anyone else was following. Mars leaned on the seat and felt an overwhelming sensation of fatigue. Wren held his hand while he fell asleep. "Wake up, baby." Still confused, it took him a while to notice that they were parked on the road beside the entry to the woods that led to Terrance's house. Abby and the fisherman pulled Spike out of the car. Mars's wounds were still uncertain to him. His right leg was hurt, but he couldn't see where. He limped his way through the woods, leaning on Wren's shoulder as Terrance and Abby dragged Spike. When they arrived at the stone path to the door, Aries the wolf waited for them, as a dog waits for its owner after a whole day outside. He sniffed all of them, but stopped near Mars and Wren. When she brought him into the room, the animal followed them and lay on the floor next to the bed. She took out his clothes and brought a container of water and cloth. His fatigue overcame the burning pain from the cleansing of the wounds. He slept with the warm, wet touch of the fabric on his skin. Now, my next story is, as I mentioned, this is from a writer who writes fictional short stories in Substack. Now, most of his stories are serialized, and it would be really hard for me to read those, but he did publish this one standalone story, although it begs at the end, I will warn you, that there may be more like this coming, so I'll be on the lookout if he writes any more of this particular tale here. So, this comes from crann Short Tales, Into the Fire, Sci Friday entry, he says. The bridge of the CNS Donovan was shrouded in shadows that were broken only by the flickering of the monitors at the watch stations. The captain looked up from his data device as the ship's computer sounded the shift change. He covertly watched as the first shift came in and relieved the dog watch. With a hidden smile, he pretended to watch the tactical plot on the repeater screen next to his chair. When he thought he had given him enough time to settle in and look over the previous shift's reports, he turned his chair to the left and caught the attention of the operations officer. "Status report." "One moment, please, sir," she requested as she pushed a lock of raven hair behind her right ear and looked over her console. When she looked back up, her hazel eyes locked on his, and for a moment he was lost in the past. With crystal clarity, he recalled the day 10 years earlier when his best friend had introduced him to the woman he intended to marry. If anything, he thought, she's only grown more beautiful with time. "Sir?" she inquired. "What the?" He cast back in his thoughts. "Damn, I didn't even hear her report. I'm sorry, Commander. I was momentarily lost in thought." As she gazed at him, her expression turned thoughtful. "I see, sir." Then her lips curled in a wicked smile. "If my husband were to find out." The captain looked over to where the tactical officer was pretending to clean under his fingernails with an imaginary knife and feigned to shiver. "If you will please repeat your report, I'll try not to get lost in thought again." The operations officer laughed softly and winked at her husband before gracefully giving her report. "We are running with all active communication systems shut down. Only passive systems are online." The captain nodded and returned to the sensor suite, only to find the blonde-tressed sensor chief gazing at him. As she unconsciously licked her lips and brushed her hands down her sides, the captain's eyes followed the motion, and he had no trouble imagining the young woman in the traditional gauzy outfit of a Virgilian dancer. He could almost see her lithe form beckoning him to partake of freely offered paradise. The ensign's eyes darkened, as if she could read his thoughts. Her lips curled into a mischievous grin. She calmly stated, "All sensor systems are locked in passive mode. Emissions control status is confirmed." The captain blinked. "My God," he thought, "I need to get my ashes hauled in the worst way. I am most surely thinking improper thoughts." After taking a deep breath, he turned his chair away from temptation and requested an engineering report. "Gravity drive functioning within parameters. Jump drive is on hot standby, and the zero-point reactor is running at 99.5% efficiency," came the clear, concise report from the chief engineer. "Thank you, Mr. O'Shea." The captain nodded and turned to the left, bypassing the mission's operations station. He was about to ask for a tactical report when he saw the weapons officer hunched over his console, staring intently at the readouts. "Paul?" He paused as the tactical officer held up his right hand for a second. As he waited patiently for the tactical officer's report, he was mentally reviewing the current special operations doctrine, which called for a completely stealth approach to the listening posts that dotted the borders between the Muslim Caliphate and the Free World's Confederacy, followed by insertion and retrieval of recon teams by stealth shuttles. Since all communications were by tight beam laser links, and all energy emissions were damped, detection by enemy forces was theoretically impossible. "The bad thing is," Weiss mused, "I've seen the impossible happen." Tactical considerations. A few minutes later, Commander Paul Freys looked up and nodded. "All clear. I thought I saw something on passive sensors, but whatever it was, it's not showing up now." Weiss quirked a brow and tapped his fingers on the armrest. He had a decision to make, which depended on what Freys would say next. "What do you think it was?" Freys shrugged. "Without using full sensors." "Which would give our position away," Weiss interrupted. "Which would give us away," Freys agreed. "I couldn't tell. It could be a stealth ship or a piece of space debris." He looked at Weiss and saw the multitudes of scenarios play out on his eyes. "Bring us to full stop," Weiss commanded, then turned to look at the tactical operations officer. "Mr. Hishado, report." "We will be in laser communication range of Outpost 9 10 minutes after we start moving again. Recon Squad 7 and Ranger Platoon 4 are on standby." Weiss leaned back. "How long has it been since we heard from Outpost 9? Oriental officer called up the information. "According to command, Recon Squad 12 has missed 3 sit reps." Weiss leveled a look at him. 3 situation reports. Were they 3 in a row or intermittent?" His shadow scratched his cheek. "The last 3, he replied, then checked, "and before you ask, that information is current as of our decanting from hyperspace." "That was 2 weeks ago," Weiss frowned. "They've missed 5 now." He turned back to tactical. "Paul, how certain are you that what you saw wasn't a ship?" Freys blinked and gave it some thought. To someone who knew him as Weiss did, the blank look on his face meant he was mentally reviewing the data. 68 to 72%. Weiss nodded. "I'll take those odds," he commented as he leaned back. Mr. White, resume course at 110 gravities. When we are just inside laser comm range, bring us to a full stop." Without waiting for a confirmation of his orders, he pushed himself out of his chair and gestured to Hishato. "Walk with me." The dark-haired intelligence officer locked his console and followed Weiss off the bridge, across the corridor, and through the hatch marked Combat Information Center. He walked over to the holotank. "Give me an overview of Outpost 9. After sitting down, the tactical operations officer pulled out a chair and activated the holotank. Within minutes, a holographic representation of the listening outpost was hovering above the tabletop. To the untrained eye, it looked like a miner's shack that had been planted on an asteroid that seemed to drift in space. But underneath the facade were the most powerful sensors known to man, and the receivers were directed towards the heart of the Muslim Caliphate. Weiss stared at the ugly-looking carbonaceous asteroid, then reached out, touched one side of the image, and pulled it toward him. The computer interpreted his command and rotated the image on the x-axis. He watched momentarily, then zoomed in on 2 points, examining them closely. He then touched the top of the image and drug it down, moving it on the y-axis, again zooming in on the 2 points of interest. After 5 more minutes of staring at the hologram, he turned to Hishato. "Here's the plan. I want the Rangers to enter the secondary docking port and search room by room. I want Recon Team 7 to dock at the escape pod bunker and sweep toward Central Control. Recon 7 will not contact us until the comm array and Central Control are deemed 98% clean and clear." "Understood, sir," the tactical operations officer solemnly replied as he finished inputting the orders. Weiss held up one hand as the quiet hum of the deck plates beneath his feet changed pitch. Shadow put an image of the Donovan in the holofield without being asked, which adjusted itself to the tactical plot. Weiss nodded as he saw the strike cruiser's position just inside laser communications range. His hand went up to his right ear and activated the interlink. "Captain Weiss to Shuttle Bay. Prepare 2 Cobras for launch." So that kind of leaves you hanging a little bit. Makes me wonder there might be another story on that. So I'm going to take a little break right now, and I'll be back in a couple of minutes, and we'll finish up these last 2 stories here. I want to invite everyone to listen to Crann and beatha Stories and Poetry every Monday night at 11 p.m. Eastern Time on Reese Across America Radio. Search out www.reaseacrossamerica.org/radio by typing in the word Reese in these mobile apps, iHeartRadio, Odyssey, or TuneIn. Or find them on a web browser and join us to listen to the show and support WAA Radio, Whiskey Alpha Alpha Radio for any veterans listening. Reese Across America is a nonprofit radio station that supports veterans programs and organizations that help needy veterans. By joining us at Reese Across America, you are helping to support veterans in need across the U.S. So search us out and enjoy the shows they have to offer, and thank a veteran while you're at it. Now I want to take another minute or so to ask for a donation of any amount to help me keep this podcast going and to advertise my website. I've set up a donation tab on the Crann and beatha Stories and Poetry webpage at rss.com and a donation page on my website at www.crannandbeatha.com, using PayPal for your security. This way there is no credit card info saved anywhere, and you can use any currency you wish from around the world. If you like this podcast, please share it with everyone you know in your social circles, as the writers I showcase in this podcast deserve all the exposure they can get. I created this podcast for them because I love to read their work, and I believe it should be shared with the world. Now I want to explain how to find my website. Since the show is audio only, just take the website name from the podcast logo shown here and search for it. Visitors finding the website for the first time will reach the welcome page to learn a little bit about what's inside. There you'll see a homepage link at the bottom of the page. Click on it if you wish to enter my world. And on the menu bar at the top, there are links at all the pages in the website. Feel free to look around all you want. If you should happen to want to buy one of my books, all the better. Thank you for your patronage and support. Now back to the show. My third story is entitled, "And It Was All Because of a Missing Receipt. Sometimes a dream come true is not what it seems," by Sarah Fellers, published in the Fiction Writer's Den. The house was on fire. leaping, spitting, all-consuming flames surged through the halls, lit the windows, and licked at the old chandeliers. That horrible creaking sound? That was the wood of the old two-story giving in to the blaze. Zeke watched it with dead hazel eyes. Anyone else would have screamed in fury at the gods of such a fate. He would have sunk to his knees and cried. He would have stared in utter disbelief at his life savings going up in smoke. But after the day he had, Zeke wasn't surprised. The universe hated him, and this was his ultimate punishment. Earlier that day, "Honey, where did you put the receipt for my new dress?" Cleo had everything Zeke had ever wanted in a girlfriend. She was beautiful, but not so much that he was worried about other men. She was successful and content to be working most of the day instead of blowing up his phone, and she had a knack for talking to the people that he hated, so he didn't have to. She wandered around his bedroom, opening the dresser drawers, shuffling through the nightstands, and flipping through the file folders he should have left at work. She searched, scanned, and examined everything from the Californian king-size bed and its now familiar silk sheets to the futon by the window. She even came close to checking the long blackout curtains. "I told you not to throw out that receipt," she called. When Zeke entered, he was unprepared for the look of genuine alarm on her pretty face. "It's just a receipt. Can't you ask the store for another one?" he asked him between sips. He had to get his daily smoothie in somehow. She shook her head. "No, not this. You can't. You don't understand. It's not just some paper. I need that one." His first red flag should have been that look of alarm. But the warning signs didn't start for Zeke until they heard the sound of breaking glass from downstairs. The couple exchanged a confused look, then left for the first floor. Their entryway to the house was a double-door entrance. Coming in, the doors with their stained glass windows would be flung open to hardwood floors, crown molding on the walls, and neutral furniture mixed with decorations for the spring tastefully sprinkled throughout. The living room had salmon and burgundy throw pillows with hints of a deep leafy green on the shelves. The coffee table had a carefully arranged bouquet of lilies in an abstract vase carrying the green. One of the stained glass windows was broken, pieces of the colorful shards making a trail directly to the coffee table, where the lilies were spilling out of an equally shattered vase, dripping water onto the carpet. The culprit behind the vandalism? A rock. A rock sat just to the right of the coffee table, and attached to it was a note. Zeke was about to pick it up when Cleo snatched it and untied the note. Something flickered in her eyes as she read it. "Well," Zeke said, "this was just a prank, right?" Cleo stiffened. Her grasp on the note tightened. "It's no big deal. It's a prank, that's all. What does the note—" "Never you mind. I need that receipt." And she took off towards the kitchen, pocketing the note. Later, while Zeke was assessing the damage, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see a tall blonde woman in large sunglasses, a business jacket, and a scowl. "I'm running out of patience," she asserted. "I need those numbers, and I need them now. Where's Cleo?" "I'm sorry. Who are you?" Zeke asked. He had never seen this woman before in his life. So she hasn't mentioned me. Let me guess. Cleo is a busy travel writer for an inclusive magazine?" she asked. Red flag number 2. "If you knew my girlfriend, you would know what her career is. I'll ask you one more time. Who are you, and how do you know Cleo?" To his surprise, she laughed. "Wow, I knew she wasn't serious before, but this? Oh, well, I'll have to hand it to her. Look, just tell her Cinderella needs a ticket to get to the ball. She'll know what it means." Moments later, the strange woman vanished from sight as though she were a ghost. She left no trace. Confused, Zeke went back inside, calling for Cleo. He went through the rooms downstairs, then checked the basement and the two-car garage. The upstairs bedrooms, maybe? The yard? Their house had cost him every penny he had saved since medical school, and he still had to take out a bank loan. But it was worth it. He had his dream home, his dream girl, his dream career. Not many people got so far in life before 40, and he was content. This was just an off day. He had no idea how wrong he was. Not until he climbed the stairs and found Cleo in a deep, passionate kiss with a man. "Cleo!" The shout was louder and angrier than he intended. Was this the Twilight Zone? The two sprung apart like two teenagers who had been caught in some scandalous act. He stared at her, his mouth hanging open. She hesitated and then snapped in a turn towards the man. "Roger, I told you we were over. When you going to take a hint?" "How did you even get into my house?" Zeke demanded in disbelief. Roger shrugged and smirked. That rat bastard. Roger had a bloody nose before he could say anything to give any reason behind the smirk. And then, to add to the craziness of the day, the man went out the window. He disappeared just as suddenly as the woman had. Cleo wrapped her arms around herself defensively and gave a cautious smile to Zeke. "Feel like dining out tonight?" she asked. "I think we have some things to talk about." Zeke gave a reluctant nod when his cell phone went off. His stomach jumped. He wasn't supposed to be on call that day, but when he looked at the number, he recognized the name Samuel Lewis as the president of his hospital. Hey, Pres Lewis, I'm surprised to hear from you today," he said warmly. Samuel Lewis was turning out to be a good friend and an even better boss. The best way to make a bad day better. Good news about your career, Zeke figured. "Zeke, I'm sorry to do this, son, but I have to cut you loose." That was not at all what Zeke was expecting. "Wait, what? Wait. You said before you hadn't worked with such a gifted healer in years. You said that yesterday. What is going on? Did I do something?" "It's out of my hands, Zeke. I'm sorry." Click. Cleo bit her bottom lip as Zeke stared at his phone in disbelief. She rocked back and forth on her heels and then started to pace. He looked up at her. "No, she couldn't possibly. There's no way you would have any idea why I just got fired, right?" "You work for the CIA. My girlfriend is a secret agent. Cleo, my love, the woman I share a home and life with, works for the CIA." "Zeke, you've been saying that since we got in the car. Do you want to give it a rest?" Cleo was in the driver's seat, of course. Zeke had downed one too many at dinner, while Cleo tried to explain how she had been lying for their entire relationship. "This is why I needed the receipt. The clerk who gave it to me is an undercover cop. She was on the verge of outing a small-time smuggling ring when suddenly they brought in a foreign group of mercenaries, including several people on Interpol's most wanted list. We still have no idea why they were brought in, but from what we can tell, someone in this small smuggling ring is connected on a very high international level. That receipt had a code on it that would have told me and my partner the time and place of their next meet." By the time this explanation was done, Zeke was 5 sheets to the wind. He found himself laughing in between his hiccups for a response. Finally, Cleo shook her head in a sincere apology to him and offered to drive him home. "Aunt Day who you were missing," he sloshed and slurred. "Roger, who kissed me? That kiss came out of nowhere, I promise. He's my captain," she began, but was cut off, and soon Zeke knew why. They both left the car slowly, as though they were both moving through water. Zeke felt dazed. Was it possible this was all just a horrible nightmare? He was dizzy enough from the drinks to convince himself. That is, until he felt the heat from the fire spreading through his home. The dream home that he had shared with the dream girl while he worked his dream job. They both stood there and stared. They knew they needed to call the fire department. The neighbors were starting to leave their homes and shout at the couple. They would need to talk to them too. But all they could do for the moment was stand there and stare. "All because you lost that receipt?" he asked finally. Cleo shrugged, unable to tear her eyes away from the glowing scene. "I can't say, but I can tell you one thing, Zeke, and that is, when we get the paperwork from the insurance company, I'm keeping it with my things." My last story is a very short one. It's Memories of a Rosebush by David Pahor, and this was in Illumination Curated. At times, it is not best to let sleeping crew members lie. If it was to manipulate me into eventually buying the decommissioned fast frigate, I shall never know. Of course, the ship dealer's wit had run a thorough background check on me and must have discovered, despite my far-well past, my obsession with tech from the Empire's golden age. Be it what it may, they revealed the artifact to be a part of the complimentary package to sweeten the deal on the overpriced vessel, together with the additional sensor blisters, antimatter magnums, and maintenance droids, and a pair of planetfall shuttles. Initially, I was skeptical. It was undeniably one of the first unabridged AGI models, but quite the worst for wear. With clenched teeth, they finally threw in a full-blown overhaul on the combat android, and we shook hands. At night, I often watch the machine sleeping on its bunk, and it makes me feel all warm inside, more than I have been since a lifetime ago when my parents sold me from the little farmhouse and pretty snow-covered garden to the condottieri band from the colony troubles. I signed over her ownership papers to herself weeks before. Each day I promised myself to tell her the following ship morning, my heart in turmoil and the remains of my pride withering leaf by leaf, as if from the rosebush whipped by winter's gusts. What I fear more than death is that she would decide to leave. And that's the stories I have for you this week. Again, I regret not having any poems, but you know what? They just didn't seem to come up on the list this week. So I wish you well. Just remember that to come back next week, and I'll have some more stories, and I will have poems for you next week. Sláinte. Gara Mahagat. Thank you for listening to the show today. I hope you enjoyed the variety of stories and poems again this week. Maybe one of them might touch your heart a little. Disclosure for everyone. In order to read the complete stories and poems, you'll need to sign up for a subscription to Medium. If I see a link by the author on one of the stories to allow everyone to read it, I will let you know in the newsletters. Please return again next week for another episode of Crann, beatha, Stories and Poetry. As a Sean K, I want to continue to delight you with a story or a poem that may bring you a smile or make you think a little bit after we part for the day. As I say goodbye this week, I wish to leave you with this Irish blessing as you go about your day. Long life and fair health to you. Salfada a gúsprach, sláinte chuad. Slán go foil. Goodbye for now.